Hey everyone, thanks for your time, especially on the opening weekend of U.S. football here in the States. Before most of the games, we saw Congress return, mostly for bigger political stuff, but the Senate had an event to talk about their moon race with China, and the acting NASA administrator is talking about that too, but nobody's plans have changed. Congress wants to go all in to land the next people on the moon before China in this decade, but so far the White House is sticking with their plans for the next decade. In that plan, NASA only gets one shot at a lunar landing on the Artemis II mission, and a Senate hearing on Wednesday, September 3rd, expressed growing doubts that it will happen in less than 2 years. But besides doubts from some and platitudes from others, no one said much about the situation or provided any detail about why they have doubts or why we should believe the platitudes. If there's a problem with the Artemis III plan, no one suggested any alternatives. If there are more delays for Artemis III preparations, no one is saying. In other words, same old, same old. And that means all the same old questions are still there, unanswered and unacknowledged. I'll go through more of the performative, not informative political stuff later, but in this video I'll go through the rest of the Boeing SLS production update, finally some details about the RS-25 test that the White House blacked out in June, and an important NASA leadership appointment. First, the latest on Artemis II preparations. Artemis II watch continues, with Exploration Ground Systems processing all of the Orion and SLS hardware for launch at the Kennedy Space Center, and preparing to add the final pieces on top of the SLS rocket in the Vehicle Assembly Building in perhaps the next month or so. The rocket is more or less ready for the final two pieces to be stacked. All the standalone SLS integrated testing is complete, and EGS Integrated Operations is working to close out the solid rocket booster systems tunnels and the core stage engine compartment for launch before Orion arrives next month. In the Launch Abort System facility in the KSC industrial area, EGS Spacecraft Offline Operations stacked the Launch Abort System tower on top of the Orion crew module in August, and NASA KSC Public Affairs says that teams are in the process of installing the ogive fairing panels. After those 4 panels are lifted into place, hundreds of fasteners will connect them together, and additional hardware, spring bumpers and tangential fittings, will be installed. During this past week, KSCPAO also posted imagery of 2 of the secondary CubeSat payloads that are in the multi-payload processing facility where the Orion stage adapter is being prepared for stacking. The CubeSats will be installed in dispensers around the inner circumference of the OSA, and then the OSA will be moved to the VAB and stacked on top of the SLS in-space second stage, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. NASA signed agreements with 4 international partners to fly 1 CubeSat for each. Pictures were posted showing installation of the South Korean KRAD cube this week, and pictures from the last week of August showed the Saudi Space Agency's Space Weather CubeSat being prepared for installation in the MPPF. NASA also has agreements to fly a CubeSat from Argentina and Germany, and previously Exploration Ground Systems had said that they will wait as long as they can in the MPPF for all 4 providers. The timing of the OSA move could be based on when all 4 are installed in the connector, but also when Orion is ready to move to the VAB after preparations in the LASF are completed. That's what's next for Artemis II launch preparations, finishing Orion integration with and encapsulation by its launch abort system, and finishing CubeSat installation in the OSA. EGS is working to have Orion ready to roll to the VAB in about a month, in early October. The OSA would need to be stacked first, so we'll see that first, but we'll also have to watch for Orion milestones in the LASF and when the OSA is moved to the VAB. After Orion is encapsulated in the LAS, all the fairing pieces have to be connected, there are functional checks between the LAS and the crew module hatches, and there's application of room temperature vulcanizer over seams between the fairing panels. RTV is applied as a caulk-like weatherproofing material that also has to withstand the aerodynamic heating as the vehicle accelerates through the lower atmosphere during the launch. Once Orion is stacked, NASA wants to complete final VAB preparations for the Artemis II launch in the final quarter of 2025. And I recently went through the schedule of testing and rollout preparations with Matt Check of EGS in 2 video episodes. The link to the most recent episode is in the upper right, and I'll put links to both of them in the description. At the end of last week, I got an update from Boeing on SLS production, and I mentioned a few takeaways from that at the time. They're focused on production of hardware for Artemis 3 and 4 now, since there are only a few closeout tasks they need to support on the Artemis II vehicle. For Core Stage 3 and Artemis 3, engine section integration continues now in VAB High Bay 2 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where it is now set up in the Core Stage Vertical Integration Center. NASA's last schedule update was that it would be ready for the final mate with the rest of the stage in the spring. That means the engine section would be fully outfitted and fully checked out by then. Boeing is working with subcontractors in their supply chain to get critical hydraulic systems parts delivered for installation in time to meet those latest schedules. NASA is building new thrust vector control actuators for the RS-25 engines, a pair for each, and hydraulic recirculation pumps, one per system, after consuming most of the parts inventory inherited from the shuttle program. As it turned out, only a few shuttle main propulsion system parts were used as is. The RS-25 engines are used as is, but as with shuttle when they were called Space Shuttle main engines, the engines are in separate project offices, so to speak, from the stage. The rest of the stage is still at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans. The liquid oxygen tank sump is now installed. That operation was performed in Cell A of Building 110, and the tank was moved to Area 6 in Building 103, after being rotated back to horizontal and placed on Rotational Assembly and Transportation Tools, or RATs. The liquid hydrogen tank and the inner tank are a couple of doors down from Area 6 in the final assembly area, Area 4748. The inner tank, LOX tank, and forward skirt are being prepared for the forward join, where those three elements will be bolted together and then functionally integrated. Right now, Boeing says that standalone functional testing of the inner tank is complete, and analogous testing for the forward skirt is in work. For the LOX tank, Boeing will be installing the mast that holds the tank's liquid level sensors inside and doing foam closeouts of the newly installed sump as a part of the forward join preps for that element. The LH2 tank should be getting closer to its intermediate aft join, where it will be stacked onto a simulator for the engine section. The simulator has the appropriate attach points so that the top 4/5 of the stage can use the same ground support equipment to be transported from MAF to KSC as the first two fully assembled units did. For Artemis 4, Boeing is building the fourth core stage unit and two exploration upper stage articles, a ground test structure, and the first flight working unit. They are working to consolidate their KSC production activity in the vehicle assembly building, and noted last week that the engine section for Core Stage 4 was moved from the Space Systems Processing Facility to the VAB. NASA KSC Public Affairs posted a still image of that unit in the VAB transfer aisle taken last Wednesday, August 27th. That unit has another set of quad pods attached and is using the same tooling in the transfer aisle for eventual mate with its boat tail assembly. The boat tail hasn't yet been shipped to Florida. The Core Stage 4 engine section will be moved into High Bay 2 at some point in the future. With this move, all the large hardware elements have been transferred out of the SSPF, and Boeing will continue moving offline subassembly hardware and logistics over until the transfer is complete. Assembly of the Exploration Upper Stage Structural Test article, which will have almost all the structural elements of the stage, is ongoing, but most of the notes this time were on the flight article, which will include working machinery, propulsion systems, and avionics, and eventually 4 L3 Harris RL-10 engines. But that's still a ways off. Right now, Boeing is beginning assembly of the flight article structural elements after completing the qualification articles that are built into the STA. Structural assembly at this point is with the domes, barrels, and rings for the upper stage flight article. Boeing says that welding has started for the first LH2 tank flight article dome, possibly the constituent parts, the gore panels and rings. They've also started welding the rings for the inner stage and the rings for the forward and aft adapters. Welding of the aft adapter barrel is in work, and subassembly of the equipment shelf has also started. As I first reported last week, I got the opportunity to visit the L3 Harris Aerojet Rocketdyne facility in the Los Angeles metro area at the end of August. The Canoga Park facility is now in full production mode for RS-25s after restarting production of the former Space Shuttle main engine. Manufacturing of the engine was modernized from 20th century production, and at the same time engine performance was also upgraded from both shuttle levels and the initial SLS operating level. Aerojet Rocketdyne facilities around the country, including the one in the LA area, have started delivering new flight engine kits for L3 Harris to the Stennis Space Center in southern Mississippi for final assembly and acceptance. The first full flight engine, serial number 20001, was hot-fired at Stennis on June 20th. In another sign of changing NASA policy, the test was not carried live by the agency for the first time in almost a decade, and video of the test was not released for almost 2 weeks. The test was a major milestone for L3 Harris and for the SLS Liquid Engine Office, but NASA did not provide any advance notice of the test before, and then did not disclose the test until 3 days afterwards, saying very little about the test at that time. So the visit to the L3 Harris facility 2 months later was the first opportunity to learn any details about it. I got a chance to speak with Mike Lauer, the RS-25 program director for L3 Harris, and Bill Muddle, their lead RS-25 field engineer, during the visit. Mike was in the conference room at the Canoga Park facility, and Bill was on the phone from Florida, where he supports production and launch operations at the Kennedy Space Center. In this excerpt of the interview, I asked them to go into some detail about the Engine 20001 hot fire test back on June 20th. I assume that the intention is still you only want to have to static fire it once. Is it the flight engine? Is it essentially an acceptance test then? What's some of the objective?
when we do an engine test at Stennis?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's an acceptance test. Where we're characterizing that engine's performance. So the engine thrust level, the specific impulse, we're checking the calibration coefficients. So we're basically running all the new parts through a sequence to accept it. And once that check's good, there's nothing more we need to do. We go through what we call our second E&Ms. It's where we check, mechanical, electrical stuff afterwards, and then we basically package it up and we store it in place until it's called down to KSE. And then when Bill gets it, he goes and runs the integrated checks when we've plugged it into the vehicle, and the vehicle starts talking to the engines.
Mm-hmm. So I think I heard them called engine tags, like in Houston, way back when, from like a booster controller, that they have a sort of a knowledge base of what the engine looks like in different points in a main stage
for a unique for each engine for an engine.
Yeah, I mean, some sort of a baseline.
We definitely characterize the engines through that test, and then post test or post flight, let's say, we'll check to see how that engine performed against our predictions and do comparisons there to see if there was any anomaly. So we definitely come in knowing what to expect on each engine given that testing.
Okay. Are there any other, like when I was talking to during the adaptation, sort of certifying adaptation, and then into restart, we would talk about objectives when you're doing like retrofit 2, retrofit 3.
Yeah,
objectives for the test. Are there any special objectives for the test beyond that for a flight engine?
For the singular hot fire test?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. What I saw one of your questions was, it doesn't look like we're doing quite the profile. We do a few variations of tank pressures, because the vehicle will have differing tank pressures. We'll vary mixture ratio. So we'll check that works, and then at our low power setting that we do, which is the engine is spec'd to run at an 80% power level. We'll run a little bit longer at the low power, just so we can get time to see things stable and all the turbopump speeds and all that. That dwell at the lower power is longer than you would see in a true flight profile. So part of the acceptance testing is to dwell at some of these key things, change a few parameters, once again to characterize the engine in the kind of the corners of the expected box of flight, and just see how it performs in those corners. In real flight, we ramp up to 111. Well, for the restart, 111, and then at about 120 seconds, just before booster set, there's the drop, and then back up to 111, and then taper off, obviously, at the end of the flight. Mm-hmm. So that's like a normal. That would be your true flight profile. Ours is we go all the way down to 80, dwell, see, make sure everything's checking out, go back, adjust some pressures of tank pressurization, go back up to full, 111, change some pressures and mixture ratios, check all that out, and taper off. Similar, but not exactly like a flight profile.
L3 Harris is also getting that first cluster of 4 new flight engines ready to be installed in the Artemis V core stage someday. The first new engine is tested, the second one is in final assembly at Stennis, and they are getting the third one ready to begin final assembly. In political news and notes, Congress is back in session after their summer break, and the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee held an Artemis-flavored hearing on Wednesday, September 3rd. Coming out of a hearing like this with more questions than answers isn't unusual, but in this case it's predominantly questions and predominantly the same questions. The next NASA authorization bill was the purpose of the hearing when it was announced. Congress favors continuing with the current Artemis plans, which makes sense since many of the continuing members helped craft those plans beginning 8 years ago. The rationale has changed over time. Today, a race with China to land the next people on the moon is the main talking point. There were some interesting points and an interesting piece of Artemis history in the hearing, where China's lunar landing program was said to be ahead of the US one, but no one made a detailed case. The obvious question remains, how do we know that China is ahead and Starship is behind if, 1, we don't know where their development program is today, and 2, we don't know how fast their programs are moving? Both development programs and Blue Origin's for their lunar lander are secret. If China is ahead, what evidence is that based on? If it's circumstantial evidence, what assumptions are being made? There was and is a lot of deflecting going on too, inside and outside the hearing, before and after. Although it is no longer directly involved in the lunar landing race, Gateway was brought up several times. Artemis III is planned as the crewed U.S. lunar landing mission, and the Gateway is a big part of the current Artemis plan after that. A 2028 launch date was mentioned in written remarks, but there was no discussion about Gateway's schedule. 2028 would be a slight delay from the only forecast in the public domain, which is December 2027. Starship was brought up in the hearing, along with the system's use of on-orbit propellant storage and transfer, but Blue Moon was not, even though it depends on a similar class of cryogenic fluid management technology. Outside the hearing, SpaceX talked about a future base on the moon that begins with Artemis III, but not the Starship schedule to get there or when that future begins. Does that future begin in mid-2027? Elon Musk did provide some details about the Starship test plan for 2026, now saying that Starship will do orbital refilling several times next year, so that's something to watch for. But all the primary questions were left mostly untouched. For Congress, what is their plan for sustainability after Artemis III? When is Gateway launching? For the White House, will they follow the big beautiful bill that is now law and cut checks for those programs and projects? Bigger picture, what are the signs that they care about Congress's moon race? Maybe they don't. The president's FY 2026 budget request, which they are closely following, terminates SLS and Orion in 2 years. There's likely another Artemis III delay coming, and if eliminating those programs is the priority for the White House, will they just cancel Artemis III? For development of the lunar landing programs, what is the critical path through the remainder of design, development, test, and evaluation? What are the schedules of development milestones and flight tests from here? For SLS and Orion, when will they deliver the hardware in production for the third and fourth vehicles? And for Axiom Space, when will they complete critical design review and deliver flight units for Artemis II? A strong sign of the quote-unquote small p politics is how opaque most of that is. And to be fair, pretty much everyone is playing that game. One of the questions for the public hearing itself is who was the audience for it? Generally speaking, there are few people who are undecided about this. Whose opinion were they trying to influence? For what it's worth, there is supposedly an active NASA Inspector General audit of the U.S. Human Landing System program. It was announced over a year ago in mid-July 2024. If or when that report is published, it would be less performative than a Senate hearing or social media posts, but likely more focused, more informative, and less deflective. There could be more to say about this hearing, and if so, I'll return to it, but beyond the headline sound bites, it went over well-known talking points. Fiscal year 2026 starts in a little more than 3 weeks, and the budget situation for that is more critical at the moment. In the middle of the weekly political performance making inside and outside Washington now, inside Washington, Transportation Secretary and Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy named Amit Kshatriya the Associate Administrator of the agency, with the announcement coming on Wednesday, September 3rd. The Associate Administrator is the highest civil servant within NASA, managing all of the agency's resources, from people to programs. Mr. Kshatriya was head of the Moon to Mars Program Office within NASA's Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, where the, air quotes, Artemis programs are organized. Exploration Ground Systems, Gateway, Human Landing System, Orion, Space Launch System, and the XEVA and Human Surface Mobility Program. The choice actually mirrors one made by the previously confirmed NASA Administrator, Senator Bill Nelson, who promoted Jim Free from the Exploration Directorate to Associate Administrator. It signifies that human spaceflight remains a priority for NASA within Washington, D.C. However, the situation today with government-owned and operated human spaceflight and the agency as a whole is uncertain, and the priorities and principles for NASA are in dispute between the White House and Congress. Because of that, NASA is more partisan and more political this year, like many other government agencies. The White House and Congress are in a power struggle over the future of Artemis, human spaceflight, and the agency as a whole, among other things. The immediate questions aren't so much what Mr. Kshatriya is going to do and whether the politicians say he will be given a chance, but whether or not, in reality, he will be given the authority to make policy decisions and the autonomy to implement them. That question isn't only the case for NASA's Exploration Directorate, but also in the broader sense, whether Mr. Kshatriya gets that opportunity beyond Artemis and beyond human spaceflight. Even though NASA is often contrasted with businesses, a common myth about the agency that lives right alongside that is NASA operates independently like a business or company. But that power rests between the President and Congress. Even though they are controlled by people from the same political party, those people are now fighting for control of the present and future. We'll be here to see how much power they delegate to the agency to get things done, but NASA is now a much more political agency and a significantly less public and transparent agency. So it is also much more likely that it will take longer to tell whether administrators like Mr. Kshatriya will be given a real chance. And on that note, thanks for watching this week. Like and subscribe to these videos if you find them informative and want to find out what's going on with Artemis every week. As usual, a big thanks to the members of this YouTube channel who are helping to make it possible to keep doing these videos. I am posting additional content and more frequent updates if you're interested in joining. If you're willing to make a one-time donation to support what I do, I would really appreciate it. I put a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.